there's a crypto winter going on, but don't think winter is ever too bad in El Salvador. Is their Bitcoin bet paying off?
Yeah, so I think the crypto winter has sort of cooled enthusiasm a little bit on the ground in El Salvador, at least among your average El Salvadorian. The price when they adopted Bitcoin as legal tender last year was near record highs, around 60,000. It's now trading at around 20,000. So I think that's discouraged a lot of people from using it and from investing in it. And it's also hurt the government's finances. The government has bought about $100 million worth of Bitcoin over the past 8-10 months. At today's prices, those are worth about $50 million. So you see a decline of about 50% on their Bitcoin holdings. There are some signs that some businesses are accepting it as a currency, although the vast majority of them seem not to be at this point. And among those that do accept it as a currency, it's a very small percentage of their sales that are actually in Bitcoin.
Sonali, what about here in the United States? I know that there are some Bitcoin ATMs here and there. You might find them in a bodega in New York City, for example, but are people actually using them?
It's a great question, Emily, because, for example, the other day I had a conversation with Nouriel Roubini, who is, of course, known as a macroeconomist and works a lot on emerging markets as well as the U.S. economy. And the question here was, why do you need Bitcoin? Remember, he's a Bitcoin skeptic, and why do you need Bitcoin when you just have fintech? I think it's a great question, especially when you have the U.S. government really cracking down on Bitcoin, on whether it's a and other tokens, whether it's a security or whether it's a currency or a commodity. And you look at what happened in El Salvador, and the idea of using it as legal tender really starts to define it as a currency in some ways. So the question then becomes, are other networks like the Lightning Network taking off in a bigger way as companies start to use it more? To Michael's point, whether you're in El Salvador or you're in the United States, that price fluctuation has been really scary. Now, there's another aspect here. This all comes as other currencies like the dollar are rallying, putting other emerging markets in, what my sources call severe stress, people who bank a lot of countries in the world. And so if that is already an issue, not Bitcoin under pressure, but other currencies, then you have a dual issue here for a country like El Salvador.
Interesting. Michael, what is El Salvador's government? Why are they doubling down, even though the price is under so much pressure? Why are they touting this success?
Yeah, I think, from our interview yesterday with the finance minister, I think he really sees it as a new technology that has potential in the future. And I also think, one of the things that he told us was that it has brought in some levels of tourism, some levels of foreign investment. Some of that has come in via cryptocurrency exchanges, cryptocurrency digital wallets, different companies that provide different types of cryptocurrency infrastructure. El Salvador is also a country that relies extremely heavily on remittances sent home from migrants that live mostly in the United States. Those migrants send home money usually via MoneyGram or Western Union or some of these traditional sources of money transfer services. And so I think the government is trying to save Salvadorians fees on these transfers through Bitcoin and through things like Lightning Network, which tends to be a little bit cheaper than using the actual blockchain, on-chain transactions. But we're starting to see some of these more traditional companies actually come up with ways to try and compete with that. MoneyGram announced a project with a USD stablecoin to try and transfer money faster via MoneyGram's network from the US to El Salvador. So it is true. I mean, if you use something like Lightning Network, you probably can save money on this. The thing is now these more traditional networks are starting to come up with ways to compete with that and make it cheap and fast as well.
And you think about so many of the people, Michael, who want this to work in El Salvador because it shows you that Bitcoin has another use case in payments and it can become more seamless over time in terms of transactions and payments. I think back to this University of Chicago white paper on just how many El Salvadorians don't even have mobile to use this as a means of payment. How much is there still friction, and how is that keeping or helping other nations go by the way of what El Salvador has done, like the Central African Republic, which is also adopting it in a bigger way?
Yeah, I think one of the problems, when you're in San Salvador and in some of the big cities, I mean, it is fairly feasible to use this technology. Most people have smartphones and most companies have means of accepting electronic payments. The problem is when you get outside San Salvador into some of these really rural areas, and to sort of really poor areas where people are working on farms and working as fishermen. They don't always have the technology to be able to adopt this kind of thing. So, I mean, in those areas, cash is still king. So there is, and there is a big learning curve with this kind of technology. It's very new to a lot of people, even in the developed world. So when you bring it to a country like El Salvador, which is still developing in a lot of areas, the learning curve is even steeper.